Hi everyone, in this video, I will share about reverse shell Python coding. It consists of two files which are server and client file, but I will only share about server file. Before we go further to the coding, I will explain first what is reverse shell. Reverse shell is actually a Python file written to access to a personal computer anywhere using reverse connection. And reverse connection is an effective way for a host to have access to a client's computer. So the client will initiate the connection by clicking the reverse shell file made by the host. The host then will have the client's IP address and have access to the client's computer.
Next, I will explain several terms that will be used throughout this video for better understanding. Firstly, IP address. IP address is a unique address that is assigned for internet connection. So every devices or website should have an IP address. There are two types of IP address which are dynamic and static. Dynamic is for computer and mobile devices, and static is for servers and websites. So basically, computer and mobile devices will have a changing IP address, but servers and websites will have one only IP address. Next, ports is a specific port that is associated for a network protocol for a specific service. So it means that every task that we want to use at the internet, it requires specific ports. So for example, if you want to send or receive file, there is a specific port that is assigned for it. So if we want to connect between ports and IP address is like the city and ports is like the houses at the city.
Lastly, socket. Socket is an endpoint that are required to communicate between a computer to another computer by binding the port and IP address together. So basically, the port and IP address will be combined in order to connect between the computers. So in this video, we will look a lot into socket because we want to connect between the host computer and the client's computer. Next, we will discuss on our main agenda, which is decoding for reverse shell. As I said before, for this reverse shell, it requires two files, which is server and client file. But in this video, we will only discuss on server file. So basically, for this server file, it consists of three functions. From this main function, we have three functions, which are create socket, bind socket, and socket accept. So we will discuss truly one by one for each function. Firstly, for create socket. As we discussed, we have to create a socket to connect between the computer. So we have to create a socket for the host to connect with the client's computer. So firstly, this is the function created for create socket. Create underscore socket. Then three variables are assigned as global variable, which are host, port, and S. S is for socket. Global variable means that this variable can be used at different functions. Next, we put host as blind because it will be used in the cloud server. And we put a random number for port, and S will assign as the socket function. And if there is an error for the socket, this command here is to display either the socket have error or not. So if there's error at the socket, it will display socket creation error. Next, we'll proceed on the next function, which is bind socket. This function is to bind the host IP address and the port. So in this function, we assign back the global variable, which are host, port, and socket. An s.bind function is to bind the host IP address and the port. Next, the system will listen to the socket, and this function is to display an error text if there is an error at this socket. And at the end of this function, the bind socket will be put so that if there is an error, system will execute back to get the correct socket. The last function is socket accept function. So this function is to accept the socket so that there will be a connection between the host and the client. So the connection and address will be put in the socket accept function, and the system will print that the connection has been established and display the IP address of the host and the port. There is another function that is put in the socket accept function, which is send commands function. Send commands function is to send command. So in this send commands function, there is a while true loop. This while true loop is known as the infinite loop. So in this infinite while loop, the coding will keep on executing until the user input it as quit. So after it put it as quit, the command will be closed and the system will be exit. That's all for this video. Thank you.